Thank you very much, everybody. Hello, am I audible? Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
A very warm welcome to each and everyone present here. Respected Principal Sir. Principal Sir is gradually joining us, so not an issue. Faculty members and esteemed guest speakers, Professor Asha Mukherjee, Dr. Sameena Zahra, my dear students and dear friends. Today we are talking about philosophy and how philosophy is connected with feminism. So before we begin, let me give you a glimpses of the relationship between philosophy and why this topic which we are going to discuss today is important. So as we all know that philosophy is always seen as a rational, neutral subject, devoid of all kind of worldly discrepancies and differences. It is a search for truth, as you know, search for reality, at the same time love of wisdom. It is a path, it is considered as a path of emancipation and sometime enlightenment. Both Indian and Western tradition claim to speak from such an unbiased point of view, but is it really the case? That is the point which we need to understand. So now we have a feminist philosophy with us, and thinkers. They are talking about, they raise question and they reflect upon critically on this issue. So they are trying to examine and exploring the inherent biasness and misogynistic aspect of philosophy and the irony which they are trying to reflect upon, and they are trying to face that their philosophy and most of the philosophers and thinkers, they don't accept feminist philosophy as a philosophy and feminist thinker as thinker. They say, and they always try to claim and try to show that their philosophy is not actually a philosophy. They devalue their status and they are not ready to give that status to the thinkers and feminist philosopher who are doing this philosophy. And they call feminist philosophy as misnomer, an unsuitable and unuseful approach to understand and to do the philosophy. So today we are going to reflect upon such issues through Indian and Western perspective. That is feminist philosophy is misnomer or not? We have a first speaker with us today. So let me introduce, before she join us, let me give some glimpses of his bio. Sorry. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you go ahead.
You're on mute now, Zaranissa.
So let me take this opportunity to introduce our first speaker of today's webinar, Professor Asha Mukherjee. No form of introduction can never do justice to her long and celebrated teaching career with span of over 4 decades. But let me condense for you that ma'am is a feminist speaker, writer, renowned philosopher, and what do you call?
You're losing your voice.
You are muted.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah. Yeah, now it's okay.
Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So I am saying that ma'am, she is a former...
Something is happening. Hello. You're not audible, Zarunasa. It seems you're muted.
Am I audible to everyone?
Yeah, but every time you're getting muted.
I don't know what is the problem. What is the problem? So I was just trying to give a brief introduction of ma'am's bio. So she's a former chairperson professor in Vishwabharati, the Department of Philosophy, Vishwabharati University, Shanti Niketan. Ma'am is an honorary Fulbright fellow, postdoctoral fellow of Indiana University, USA. Ma'am has a visiting professor. Ma'am has been a visiting professor in various international and national university in many countries like such as Switzerland, Iceland, Japan, Washington, USA, and
Again, we can't hear you.
am I audible? Just give me a second. I'm just thinking, what is the problem? Okay, ma'am is also a founding director of Women and Gender Study at Vishwabharati University. Ma'am has published various papers and research papers in various international and national journals on topic related with gender studies, philosophy, women-related issues, and authored various books and anthologies on empowerment of Indian women and Indian girls. She has also chaired and presented numerous papers in national and international journals. Apart from that, ma'am is a feminist activist who has always fought and speak out for women's rights and women's issues. In her celebrated career, she has been instrumental in bringing women to the forefront of women-related issues and programs. She has broken various social norms and barriers, always fought for the emancipation of women through and by Tagorean and Gandhian philosophy and Gandhian perspective. Today, ma'am is going to speak on Indian perspective related with the issue and title of the webinar. So over to you, ma'am.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
ma'am, you are audible. You are audible.
Yeah, suddenly you disappeared from the screen, so I thought maybe again it's anyway. Thank you so much, Zainunisa, for providing me this opportunity to speak, and also for such a generous introduction. Well, I don't deserve all this, but it's really nice of you to say a few words. I'm really grateful to your college, to your principal, Professor S.P. Agrawal, and also the organizing team for starting this webinar series on philosophical debate. And as you say, that perhaps we are the opening batsmen. So thank you so much for providing this opportunity to both of us, Shamima and me. Now, coming to the topic. Now, as you said, the title of the webinar is Feminist Philosophy a Misnomer? Reflections from Indian and Western Perspective. Now, if we look at the title itself, the feminist philosophy is a misnomer. This has,
ma'am, you are not properly audible.
I'm not properly audible.
Yeah.
So what do I do?
I think I can hear her very clearly. Maybe it's the problem with some people's system, because I can hear her very clearly without any breaking or anything.
Okay. I think there is some network issue from my
Zaru,
side.
it seems, Zaru, you have some problem with your
Yeah.
this thing.
Yeah, because I can hear you
Ma'am,
very clearly.
please carry on.
So can I continue now?
Yeah.
Okay. So is feminist philosophy a misnomer? Actually, you rightly started with the little bit of reflection that feminist philosophy has really not been granted an independent status. And the reason basically is that, as you said, that philosophy is philosophy, dealing with, say, for example, reasoning that is neutral, universal, rational, and more precisely, it's gender neutral. Now, if it is gender neutral, then cannot be feminist or otherwise. So, whatever philosophy we have been exposed to through our readings, we have been, even in the education system, whatever feminist we have been talking about, now this is actually a very, very recent phenomena. If we look at the kind of history of philosophy, I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, I'm sure most of you are students, participants also at this webinar. You would see that except, the very recent, like Simone de Beauvoir, etc., before that, we really do not have any women philosophers. Now, why is it? We read rationalist, empiricist, and Greek philosophy, Western philosophy,
From my side, ma'am, please.
Indian philosophy, etc., etc. But we hardly come across any women philosophers and their contributions. Now, the question is why? Is it a kind of fact or the history? Normally, the history is supposed to be neutral, and it has to be based on some kind of facts. I mean, their historical facts are different kinds of facts, but whatever they are. But even in the history, we did not in the history of philosophy, we don't find women philosophers, say 100 years back. Now, why is it? Is it the case that women never had any kind of contribution to philosophy, or they could never make any contributions? Or there is some kind of politics involved here? I'm very consciously using the word politics. Some kind of politics is involved here, that women are never recognized as philosophers. Now, in last 1 year's sort of feminist movements all over the world have shown, even within India, I'll come to that later, even within India, when we started digging at the history, we have found that we have feminist writers in different fields. And they have written, but somehow their voice have been silenced, or somehow their voice was not heard, or that was not made public. Now, this is one of the reasons that feminist philosophy becomes important. Now, so the question is, do we really know of any women philosophers, or did we read any writings from women in our philosophy, history, literature, culture, or science before 20th century? That's the question we have to ask. Before 20th century, did we have no women who could contribute to different fields? What could be the reasons for such void, if any? Or is it because of some neglect or discrimination towards women? The history of women in the world is proving that women also made contributions, but they were not recognized. Now, in last 100 years or so, in fact, recently, last 20 years or so, there are a lot of history of women are coming out at the world level, and also within India also, that starting from ancient times, because if we do not have the facts, then it may not be considered as a history of women. But I know a lot of projects which are going on, say from 12th century onwards. Since then, we have a lot of documents on the basis of which we can work out on the history of women. and their contributions. So it's really eye-opening that how much work women had done, but that was never recognized and it was never made public. Now, that's also one of the feminist tasks, to work out the history of the women and their contributions, just to make sure that, look, I mean, women also contributed to the whole sort of pursuit for truth or pursuit for knowledge. But then the question is, what is feminist philosophy? Because we are talking about feminist philosophy, and is it a misnomer? Now, first, unless we know what feminist philosophy is, we will not be able to answer whether it's a misnomer or it's really a branch of philosophy. But as you can see, that feminist philosophy is basically against or as opposed to the mainstream philosophy. For example, rationalist, empiricist, and all sorts of philosophy, whatever you have read during your student days and whatever you will be reading, it's called philosophy of mind, metaphysics, logic, epistemology, ethics. All these things are mainstream philosophy. And you hardly find women philosophers in the history. I mean, I'm separating last 100 years from the rest of the history. So the feminist philosophy and the mainstream, as opposed to the mainstream philosophy, that's the kind of binary we are talking about. Now, it's also interesting to see that we are talking about another binary, which is Indian perspective and Western perspective. So there are two binaries here: feminist philosophy as opposed to mainstream philosophy, and Indian perspective as against Western perspective. Now, I'll be talking about these two binaries during my talk. Now, to understand what exactly feminist philosophy is, now let's look at the kind of feminist concern which we have under feminist philosophy, or what feminism is all about. Let's talk a little bit of that so that it will make clear that, you know, what exactly the kind of philosophy we are talking about, which is not included in the mainstream philosophy. Feminism acknowledges the basic distinction between sex and gender. Gender is a much used and abused concept. Some explain it in purely naturalistic terms. Some hold that gender is a pure construct. Still others approach the notion phenomenologically. Gender understanding circumstances one's position as feminist. Different explanations have different consequences for feminist thought. There's no such thing as the feminist position. Now, this is very important. That although we make a distinction between gender and sex, but at the same time, when we are talking about feminism, there's no one position which can be taken as the feminist position. The basic commitment of feminism lies in this centrality of values such as respect, autonomy, and equality. Some of you must be familiar that we have been talking about equality, especially in political philosophy and also in moral philosophy. So equality is a very important notion. So equality is really common, but that's actually the departure point for feminist philosophy. So these concepts like respect, autonomy, and equality, these are the fundamental concepts for feminism as well. Feminists acknowledges that values essentially differ from individual to individual, culture to culture, and are often guided by conflicting interests of caste, class, race, religion, and politics, and so on. Keeping these differences in mind, feminists always refer to feminisms in the plural as feminisms, giving rise to ambiguities and heterogeneity. But such ambiguities are essential part of the feminist program. So to say that there's no feminism, though no one feminism, now this is not really an ambiguity. This is the reality which actually is the foundation for feminist programs. Therefore, it is really an essential part that feminism is always feminisms in the plural and not one, and heterogeneity and one kind of unitary program has always been opposed. Now, feminists try to understand the social reality of gender and tries to get rid of the patriarchal mode of dominance culture, ending sexual oppression and injustices in a more moral imperative at the level of thought as well as practice. Now, this is also very important because feminism is not simply a theory. Feminism is not simply a philosophy in the sense of philosophy, which is like ivory tower kind of philosophy. You must have noticed that nowadays philosophy is actually coming down to the earth. And we are talking about applied philosophy, applied ethics, etc. So everything has to be applied, which means that it has to have connection with the life of the people, daily life of the people, and it has to have some relevance in the life of the people. Although thoughts are equally important, because unless we have the ideas and thoughts, one cannot really apply them into the reality or into the daily life. Therefore, the thought as well as their realization is a kind of moral imperative at the level of thought as well as practice. At the level of thought, we need to understand ourselves well enough as human beings, as normal females, as part of reality. Subjects as well as collectivities are necessarily dynamic agents and not simply a passive victim of religious traditions and culture. Now, this I will talk a little later more in detail, but every person, every agent, every individual is a dynamic individual. Now, as I see myself today, I may not remain the same even tomorrow. So my way of thinking, my way of bringing, my way of looking at the situation, and also some kind of exposure to new things might help me in changing. Therefore, there's nothing which is static. We are all dynamic agents, and not simply a passive victims of religious traditions and culture. Very often we are sort of made a victim of the religious and culture, religious traditions and culture. And this is not true about only of India, but it is true about the whole world, that we are made passive victim of religious traditions and cultures. And this is true about almost all the cultures and civilizations of the world. Thus, feminist by implication is committed to redressing perceived male bias in Indian culture and religion, not as an emancipatory agenda, but taking women as subjects and their collectivities. It examines relation between theories of political questions in ethics as such as justice, equality, and rights, feminism as method of questioning and critiquing questions, the presuppositions and concepts that are based on either on overt or covert male bias. Feminists emphasize on recognizing women's lived experience. So feminism is much more based on the lived experience, although we are talking about theories as well, but the lived experience of the women is the foundation. Feminist philosophers point to the discrimination involved in the dualistic mode of thought. They are critical about the conceptual dichotomies such as nature, culture, self and the other, transcendence, immanence, universal, particular, mind, body, reason, emotion, and private, public, and so on. Now, here I will try to point out that the mainstream philosophy does not really base itself on dichotomies. Basically, as we have said, the philosophy has to be rational, it has to be critical, it has to be universal, and so on and so forth. Now, as opposed to the mainstream philosophy, mainstream philosophy deals with transcendence, universal, mind, emotion, reason, and public, and so on. We talk about objectivity, etc., etc. Logic, for example, has to be objective. Whatever is valid is valid for everybody. Whatever is right, it has right for everybody. Whatever is truth, it's true for everybody. Now, in case of feminism, in case of feminist philosophy, these dichotomies are broken, because a human being can be rational as well as emotional. A woman is rational as well as emotional. So only rationality is accepted as a philosophy, and emotions are not accepted as philosophy. Now, this is something which is not acceptable to feminists. In the same way, public is whatever is public. For example, the notion of justice, Rawls' theory of justice, Nozick's theory of justice, etc. They are all based on public notion of justice. Now, even the notion of justice has to be based on some kind of feeling of the person, of the person. Not only it has to be just, but it also should look like it's justice. All right. So therefore, these all binaries are broken by the feminists. They argue that these dichotomies inform various types of theories of discrimination and exclusion, and they facilitate the justification of gender hierarchies. Now, by doing this, that unless it is rational, it's not philosophy, means that women are excluded because women are emotional. And therefore, you will find that most of these philosophers, including Mill, Aristotle, Kant, Descartes, etc., they all rejected women. And they had the least experience of women. I mean, they even to have relationship with women itself was a kind of below rationality. Therefore, the whole feminist program is actually against these dichotomies. The personal has to be addressed not only by ethics and politics, but by all branches of knowledge. So whatever is personal, for example, emotional, subjective, etc., these are also the kind of ethical issues, and they are also philosophical issues. But all branches of knowledge include science. In science, we are all the time we're talking about objectivity. We are sort of personal part is always rejected. So further commitment to feminism leads to one of the questions, the presupposition that women's capacity for reason is inferior to men, and to question the moral and political theories which treat women as instrumental to the interest of men. Now, these are the things which are questioned. So women's reasoning is inferior to men. These are the presuppositions. These are questioned by feminist philosophy. Male-dominated institutions such as the family and the state also need to be scrutinized through feminist lenses. Some feminists see feminism as a celebration of being a woman, as an overreaction towards the male domination and bias, and consider being women as a virtue. Now, this is also one kind of feminism, as we have said, that there is no the feminism, but one kind of feminism sees feminism as being women as a celebration, because being women is a virtue. Not all feminists agree that there are distinctive feminist virtues or values. Some are even skeptical regarding their traditional positive virtues, such as willingness to nurture or affinity with caring. Now, very often, as it is said, that women have a special quality, that they can care for others. They can provide. They can be care providers. They actually can give birth to a child. A male can never give a birth. So in that sense, they are privileged and they have the sense of virtue. Some are even skeptical regarding traditional positive virtues, such as willingness to nurture or affinity with caring. Still, some others consider feminism more than a voice of protest or questioning. It is moral self-reflection, a conquering on inner fears and realization of self-worth. It does not abandon values or relationship, but goes on to create new ones. Now that's very important. That women, feminist perspective, actually, it could be celebration to a certain extent, but it's not. It need not be a kind of virtue or value oriented. But it does not really negate that part of it. But it's more like a moral self-reflection, conquering one's own inner fears and realization of self-worth. Because right from the childhood, the girl child is always sort of taught not to have self-confidence, over self-confidence. Rather, all the time she has to look for others to help. I mean, if she wants to go in the evening outside, she will have to have some male person to accompany. She has to have the fear all the time. And this is something which is actually ingrained from the childhood. And therefore, feminists actually are talking about self-reflection and conquering of inner fears and realization of self-worth relationship, but goes on to create new ones. So whatever relationship you have, whatever bindings you have, still you can create new ones. The diverse forms of feminism also have some core and focal points. There is a rejection of a priori premise of male superiority. Therefore, what we are rejecting is that male are superior to female. Now, this is a kind of a priori premise which we are questioning. There are distinctive women's social experiences which are worthy of exploration. And all women do not have the same experience. Some women have different kind of, as we have said, that women is not a, it's a category. It's not a simple, I mean, it's not really, women is not, every women is unique. And I mean, the universal women, there's nothing like universal women. So women's social experiences which are worthy of exploration, social and cultural women issues which were the periphery have become the prime issues of discourse in feminism, such as bodily self, social and moral connectedness, caste, trust, friendship, nurturing emotions, etc. Now, why I'm talking about bodily self? The reason is that women and men and women, the basic differences of body. And as we have said, that we have this primary distinction of sex and gender. So sex is based on biological difference and gender is a social construct. So gender is constructed by the society, by the culture, whereas the body is actually the X and Y chromosomes which decide the gender. They are the sex particles, and therefore the body which determines women as women is important. And in every tradition of the world, women's body is not considered as a pure. It is always impure. And therefore, there are different forms of oppression for women, and there are prohibitions from culture and tradition. But then in every tradition, women are considered as impure. Therefore, the body and consciousness and their mind is considered a very important issue from feminist perspective. Thus, the need is felt of delicate balancing on the one hand, the social reality of femininity, which is part of our own experience as a social being, and on the other, we must avoid so-called feminine roles traditionally assigned to us that are source of oppression. If people are interested, people can read our edited volume, which actually was published, Women Empowerment, which was published in 2004, especially for these details. Now, I mean, these are actually, hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Right now I can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so the question is that these are the basic feminist perspective which I was talking about. And these are neither Indian nor Western. These are actually the feminist concern I was talking about. And whatever I have said, these are concerned from the pure philosophical point of view. And therefore, the question is that how Indian feminism is different from the Western feminism, if at all we can call, because I mean this dichotomy is between Indian and Western. We'll see how it works, or does it have anything really, any substantial thing to add? I guess one should also, I think most of students, if they are philosophy students, they also know that we make a distinction between Indian philosophy and Western philosophy. And that's because Indian philosophy is a system-based kind of philosophy, where we have different kind of systems, Indian philosophical systems, like Charvaka,
Yes, sir.
Buddhism.
अरे वो प्रिंसिपल सर को ज्वाइन कराने के लिए किया था.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you're
Yes,
audible.
ma'am, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
okay. Yeah. So we normally make a distinction between Indian philosophy and Western philosophy based on the system-oriented approach which we have in Indian traditions, which is basically like every system has its own presuppositions, and in defense of their presuppositions, they give the arguments in support of their. Uh, uh, and there's a kind of dialogue between all the traditions, all the systems. For example, Buddhists are criticizing Nyaya system, Naiyics are criticizing Buddhist system, and Vedantins are criticizing Nyaya and Buddhism both, etc. Sankhya, Vedanta, Mimamsa, etc. Now, these are all systematic, and there's a basic difference between Indian philosophy and Western philosophy. And for a long time, actually, it's very recently that Western philosophy, I mean, like in the West has recognized that Indian philosophy is also philosophy. And now you'll find that even in the World Congress of Philosophy, you have Indian philosophy kind of panels in different kind of systems oriented, etc., etc. So it took a long time for the West to recognize that there is Indian philosophy. I mean, they would say that it's not philosophy, it's like religion, or it is spirituality. It's not philosophy at all. In the same way, feminist philosophy is also considered as was also considered for a long time as not as philosophy, but maybe a critical method of doing philosophy. But I mean, people almost until say last 20 or 30 years back, people did not consider feminist philosophy as a philosophy. But in last 50 years, work has shown that feminist philosophy is not simply a philosophy, but also it's a new branch of philosophy in the sense that you can have philosophy of feminist philosophy of logic, you can have feminist philosophy of epistology, feminist metaphysics, and feminist ethics, etc., etc. So all the basic four branches of philosophy, now they are also feminist branches of philosophy, and they are quite developed now. So it took us many years to prove that yes, feminist philosophy is a philosophy. It's not a misnomer. But I wouldn't really have time to go into all these things. But yes, I mean, like if anybody is interested, we can bring back to these issues. So at the heart of the feminism, there lies a notion of discrimination. As we have said, that it is basically a gender bias, which we were talking about, that male discrimination. If there were no discrimination, feminism would not make any sense. What is discrimination? How do we understand the phenomena of discrimination? It presupposes that something which one deserves does not get one, then one feels discriminated. It is it just the feeling of discriminated or something more than that? It seems it is more than that, than just the feeling. At the core, there is some basic basis for not being able to uh, get the justice. So justice is invariably tied with discrimination. Justice demands that equals should be treated equally and unequals should be treated unequally. This is Aristotelian definition of justice. If two persons A and B are equal and A gets the job but B does not get the job, then we would say that B is discriminated. Further, B has the right to complain against. If A is male and B is female, that this discrimination would be treated as gender discrimination. Thus, one has the right to appeal to the Human Rights Commission or Women Commission in India and ask for justice. Human rights discourse, I know it's not very simple. I'm just giving it, I mean, trying to make understand with a simple example about raising the voice and demanding what is due to oneself. Human rights discourse is about raising voice and demanding that what is due to oneself and group or institution, society or country. At United Nations, if some country is discriminated, then country goes and makes a complaint at United Nations. Now, this is just one aspect of the lived experience of women in India in contemporary times. Concern for feminism includes such simple but most complex issues dealing with freedom, discrimination, justice, equality, moral dignity, human dignity, choices, development, individual identity, self, and the other, goal of human life, values, human rights, dignified living, women rights, etc. Now, as you can see, these are all philosophical issues. Philosophical research has been contributing and can contribute a lot in analyzing and working out solutions, resolving these issues and related issues. Social philosophy takes care of masculine, feminine, public, and private discourse, philosophy of love, religion, etc. All are deep philosophical concern, but they also form the core concern of economics, political science, sociology, history, literature, religion, culture, etc. Now, this actually is the basic kind of concern to feminist philosophy. Now, let me give a little personal note. Looking at philosophers India in contemporary times, when I look around, I think it's the scenario is the same. I do not find many women philosophers actively engaged in women issues, studies around in India. Although in India, philosophy, academics world is dominated by women at teaching, as well as students level, we find very few women philosophers actively engaged as directors of women's studies centers at universities like. Uh, Now, this I'm saying that as if you, I'm sure that in your college as well. The number of women philosophers is much more. The philosophy students is much more. But if you look at the women's studies centers or actively engaged in the kind of things, there are very few people who are really engaged. As women philosophers, I find Delhi University, Vibha Chaturvedi was there. In Jadavpur, Shefali Maitra was there. Lucknow, Ruprekha ji was there. Andhra, there's a lady, and Ranchi, and me, of course, at Vishwati. So there are hardly 5 or 6 universities in the whole country where women philosophers are engaged with women's studies or gender studies. But in general, they have maintained distance with the kind of activism demanded by feminism, even if one grants the problems related with this ism is in feminism as Madhu Kishwar. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Madhu Kishwar's work. And many other Indian women scholars have argued. They say that these are all problems related to ism. So feminism is also is a kind of ism, and therefore it is just an activism, and it really does not have much to kind of contribute. One main reason apparently is that philosophy is supposed to be conceptual. So we are coming back to the same issue, that philosophy is supposed to be conceptual and very far from lived experience. But during the last century, lived experience has drawn much more attention in philosophy, not only in the West but also in India. And due to this change, one would expect many more women philosophers joining, not only for philosophical debates but also activism. My entry to philosophy, a kind of personal note I would like to give. My entry to philosophy and later to feminist studies has a very interesting story. Let me begin with a personal note. As a child, born as Hindu, I always questioned everything, including Hindu traditions and culture. And being a girl, I was not allowed to ask questions and argue. My grandfather, who was the first principal of a missionary school in Jaipur, Rajasthan, I'm from Rajasthan, this was in 1936, suggested that I should study philosophy because that will include logic, so that I will learn to differentiate between a good argument and a bad argument. So a girl argument the premises along with the conclusions without scrutinizing the relationship between the two. Good argument means that you accept whatever follows from the premises and you don't ask whether that really follows or not. Again, after I passed my master's, my English teacher, when I would raise questions about the logicality of English grammar, jokingly told me in the class, I cannot argue with you and satisfy with the answers. After all, you are a girl, and on top of that, you have learnt logic. करेला एंड नीम चढ़ा, एक तो करेला एक तो लड़की, ऊपर से फिर लॉजिक पड़ी हुई है, सो इट इज नीम चढ़ा. नीम के पेड़ के ऊपर चढ़ने के और भी करेला ज्यादा कड़वा हो जाता है. So even today in family matters, when it is a question of discussion, hardly any arguments are allowed just because I'm a woman and I'm supposed to listen but not to question. Of course, I have the liberty to do what I choose after listening, but do not have freedom to express my opinion and make others to listen. Cannot make myself heard by others. Now, this is something which is actually the grassroots of feminism. I'm giving this personal note to express this feeling of this experience of women. Now, this is neither Indian nor Western. This is the grassroots of feminism. Now, let me discuss a little bit about the Indian feminism. Just give me a minute, please. Yeah, so I mean, for example, Indian feminism is if such a term can be used, invariably has similar concern at that of the Western feminism. The term feminism itself, even in the West, has different connotations in different contexts. As I've said, that there's no one feminism or the feminism. In Indian context, most of the feminist scholarship has been historical, and historical research has provided ground and foundation for theorizing feminism. As I was arguing earlier, the history actually is trying, through the history, through the digging into the history, we are trying to prove that, look, there were women who really contributed, but they were not actually made public, or their work has not been made public, and it was not published and like that. So in Indian context, most of the feminist scholarship has been historical, and the historical research has provided ground and foundation for theorizing feminism. For example, in recent times, after 1982, discourse on sati has actually become had become a very, very important issue. One of the reasons is our colonial past and nationalist movement, which were conflicting with the prescribed values for the Hindu upper caste women, where women found their voice. Thus, the theorizing of women feminism in India took place in a very different circumstances. As Maitri Chaudhary, a historian, puts it in her introduction of the book Indian Feminism. To quote, indeed, until the 1990s, we did not really have a body of feminist scholars engaged in academic conversation within the corpus of what is Western dominated international academic feminism. Debates on feminism in the West have been fully well represented in a very large number of writings that have been institutionalized as readings in university course. Indeed, they are so readily accessible that teaching a course on gender has entailed mandatory acquaintances with the radical liberal social Marxist feminism debates. But in India, how to relate such debates with our lived experience of the past and the recent and the present is a real problem. And it took quite a while to find out ways and devise our own language to express our own problems related to feminism. But feminism as a mark of modernity entered India through freedom struggles or nationalism and democracy. So basically, the feminism in India entered through nationalist movement. It is often argued that with strong arguments that Indian feminism is very different in character and nature from the Western feminism. Most of the Indian scholars engaged in gender discourses do not identify themselves as feminists, mainly due to the reasons that they lay emphasis on the differences in Indian and Western way of looking at the category of gender. We often come across such comments as, our problems are not the same as that of the West. Our feminism is different from the Western feminism. Our culture is culture of tolerance and compromises and not of antagonism and conflict. Our system is based on duties like pativrata, sati, and not on rights. Duties idioms provide a broader base goal for human development, which is morally superior and altruistic before anyone claims as right. On the other, centeredness leads to a self-centeredness, as a individual is only concerned with herself and making demands on others without taking any consideration with the capability of the other. Now, the other question is also important, that what are the differences between the Western feminism and Indian feminism? Sarojini Naidu, in her presidential address at the All India Women's Conference in Bombay in 1930, sees Western feminism as a threat to nationalism. Nationalism was the national unity, was for national unity, and any division as against unity, even if it was on the basis of gender, is strongly advocated by feminism, was seen as potential threat, as uh, it is coherent that women are never in the past inferior. They were always on the side of men in council and in the field of battle. Now, this is Sarojini Naidu is saying. We must also we must have no mutual conflict in our homes or abroad. We must transcend differences. We must rise above nationalism, above religion, above sex. Now, this is actually Sarojini Naidu's address to the All India Women's Conference, the first All India Conference. Now, half a century later, Indian women Prime Minister Indira Gandhi emphasizes that women in the West equate freedom to imitate men. But to be liberated, a woman must feel free to be herself, not in rivalry to men, but in the context of her own capacity and personality. We need women to be more interested, more alive, and more active, not because they are women, but because they do they cannot escape responsibility, nor should they be denied its benefit. Now, this is again Indira Gandhi giving a speech at the inauguration of the All India Women's Conference on 26th March 1980. The Indian women are necessarily tied with Indian nation culture and its very special identity. The goal was independence for both men and women. The cause was Indian. The goal was India's freedom. The women in movements in India were nationalist movements, and none of the men-women antagonism characteristic of women movements in the West was present here. So the essentialist interpretation of women and nation in nationalist movement in India has marked a phenomenal critique in the last 3 decades. India's nation making was based on unity, and women movements in the West are based on antagonism, differences, divisions, conflicts between men and women. So in India, Neera Desai remarks that the term feminism or feminist was not only popular, but there was a distinct allergy. Not only it was not popular, but also there was a distinct allergy to it. And many women, particularly academics, described themselves as women studies researchers rather than feminist scholars. Actually, even now, if you in the academic circle, even today, I have gone through this years that feminist women, I mean, feminist women are really considered as bad women. You know, even today they are not considered as militant or something like they're considered, but they are not considered as good women. So Indian feminists, unlike the Western feminists, do not voice the same anger. Why? Soma Chitnis, actually she was the Vice Chancellor of SNDT, emphasizes the men's role in the emergence and growth of women's question in India. Men as the principal oppressor is not easily accepted. And the main reason is that there are different kinds of patriarchies in hierarchical society, where gender oppression is closely linked with oppression of caste, community, and style. The concept of personal freedom and equality is alien in India, whereas the question of selfhood, individual freedom, and equality are so central to Western feminism. The question, as women's philosopher, I would raise here is what all these voices are aiming at, and in what way the differences pointed out by these scholars make sense if one wants to make a sense on the basis of one's own lived experiences. Now, I'll leave the question here, and we'll move to other question, that how this Indian feminism actually we can find, is operating today in India, and what is the situation right now. We need to also ask, does Western feminism object to institution of marriage as such? Is taking marriage as neutral, eternal unit of society and family as primary unit to import good sanskar really problematic? Because as you can see that, we are talking about the tradition, and if you don't follow the tradition, then you are a bad woman. If you're questioning the tradition and culture, then you are not a sanskari person, because you have to surrender. Primary unit to import good sanskar really problematic from feminist perspective. Scholars are arguing that Sangh Parivar and its women organizations pose new problems for feminism in India, as they support globalization and liberalization and yet remain women. Now, I think maybe I should speak a little bit about this new Indian women. In last 20 years or so, you can see that due to globalization and economic development in the country, huge number of women actually are working. So, they are actually coming out of the private sphere to the public sphere. They are participating in the economic development of the country. And that has really made a lot of difference. So we find, especially from the dress and from their way of working and their behavior and their body language, everything is different. And you find them as new Indian women. Now, does it really make any difference? Or, how much change it has brought to the society? That's the question I'm going to ask here. Middle class and its values have been defined by economic liberalism and sexual illiberalism. Now, I'm talking about this liberalism on the economic side, but sexual illiberalism on the other side, with television representing shifting their focus from social development and nationalism to politics of family, sexuality, and intimacy. Now, I don't know how many of you remember Smriti Irani's TV serials, which she was Tulsi Tere Angan Ki and so on. There's a kind of liberalism on the one hand, economic liberalism, but on the other hand, there's a sexual illiberalism, which is a part of, instead of nationalism, there's a kind of politics of the family and sexuality and intimacy. In the serials which is expressed, and even in the recent serials also you'll find this. It remains to be analyzed in what sense what women are projected as feminists. How and on what grounds, if any, we can say that Sangh Parivar and their organizations are misusing feminism as a tool, promoting good sanskaras through family ties and keeping family as a primary unit need not necessarily be problematic. Now, this is exactly what I'm trying to say, that promoting good sanskara through family ties and keeping family as a primary unit need not necessarily be problematic from the feminist perspective, as long as women have the freedom to decide what she wants to do and what she wants to be. However, it is possible within a family structure for an individual is left to the individual to work out in a delicate and strategic manner. If we look at the Indian tradition and culture, focusing only on Hinduism, we will find two conflicting pictures of women in India. On the one hand, she's always a second or last choice. If a girl is born in a family, if she's the first child, of course she's welcome. But if she is a second child or third child, then she has more and more neglect. She's always a second or last choice. And even as a first child, most of the people don't like first a girl child, because the out. So either she's a second choice or she's the last choice, and has to follow her father or brother or husband or son, and has low status in Indian society to the extent that her status becomes almost equivalent to Shudra. That just as Shudras need some kind of support from others to be uplifted, exactly. So we are talking about empowerment of women, that they need to be empowered by some kind of kindness of the society, some kind of uplifting. So her status is equivalent almost to Shudra. It's like Manu has talked about this. On the other hand, she is mother goddess. She's a symbol of power. Lakshmi, Saraswati, Durga, Kali. She's a symbol of power, productivity, determination, and welfare. She spreads happiness and nullifies both wrong and the wrongdoer, and thereby having a higher status. So she's either Devi, women is either represented as Devi or Dasi, goddess or mistress. Mythological image of women establish her as an all-powerful entity, while realistic image of women comes parai, not ours. The moment the girl child is born, immediately it is asked that you have to start collecting for her dowry so that she goes from this house. She's parai. She's not our own. And a burden to the family who has to go anyway. Either she will, either by infant death due to malnutrition, or by marriage, or by death at old age, and always have to submit to someone. She has no home of her own. She has father's house, she has shashur badi, sasural, and after she loses her husband, son's house, but she does not have her own house. She does not have her own home. Her home is only in heaven. But it is difficult for a middle class, educated working women to be either of the two images. Women today realize that they neither want to be Kali or Durga, nor want to be Roop Kumar or Nirbhaya, as you know, the rape case victim in Delhi, 2012. She wants some space to be treated as human being, a dignified person who would have power to decide to be and to do. She would have power so that she can decide what she wants to be. She can choose and she can act in such a way so that she can try her best to become what she wants to become and to do what she wants to do. Now, this is exactly what her aim should be. Further, if the main feminist objective is democratic gender justice, providing equal opportunities to women to choose to be and to do, then we need to ask what the women of India choose, or what the women of India chooses. If they choose the traditional roles such as respect, self-sacrifice, and care as a virtue, then how do we get what justice demands? Thus, we find it problematic at two levels. One at the level of state and its legislation of laws as the laws enforcing authorities are also part of the traditional value system. Two, even when the opportunities are provided by state, it hardly gets translated as functioning. I'm borrowing this Martha Nussbaum's terms, due to not exercising the choices or exercising choices in such a way that it goes against what justice demands. So if Martha Nussbaum's theory of development is aiming at developing the capabilities of women in a nation and providing opportunities, and if the opportunities are not taken by women in a nation due to their choice for mothering, nurturing, and caring, as the Indian traditional roles and values demand, then the capability approach does not help us much. Even if women are fully, morally, or genuinely aware of the choices as Martha Nussbaum would ideally like them to be, they still may freely sacrifice their interest for the family and others as caregivers within the traditional roles prescribed by patriarchy structure. There always remains this danger of being stamped as stereotype, but we will have to give moral credit for doing so as conscious moral choosers. I'm afraid Indian women are more obliged to listen to the voice of care than justice. Women in India today negotiate their identities and assert their choices through the dynamic within their family relationships, religious traditions and culture, or within the institutions, which is often not very easy. It often disturbs the family equilibrium and social equilibrium, giving rise to conflicts. The divorces, separations, broken marriages, single mothers, and remaining unmarried are some of the consequences. As you must have noticed that, why women feminists are considered as troublemakers, because once women realize that there's some kind of oppression or discrimination, then they have the revolting voice, and if they have the reporting voice, then like domestic violence, if they report, then the divorces are happening, the court cases are happening, separations are happening, marriages are broken. Now, these are all actually consequences which one has to face. Now, these are, and also some women, they just prefer to remain unmarried. Now, these are some of the consequences which are kind of disturbing for family equilibrium and social equilibrium. But these are actually part of the whole feminist program. The emerging feminist movement in India are no doubt influenced by Western ideas. The call for education in colonial India and equal rights also adapted their appeal to local issues and concerns such as dowry-related violence against women, sati, sex-selective abortion, and custodial rape. Patriarchy is just one of the hierarchies. That are many other major hierarchies with social fabric in Indian context. Relational hierarchies between women and the same family are even more adverse. In a family, a girl, when it becomes mother-in-law, becomes powerful and exercises power over the daughter-in-law. Given all these complexities, one wonders who the Indian woman is. Now, the same woman who has faced all this kind of oppressions and discrimination the whole life, when she becomes mother-in-law, she does the same thing on their daughter-in-law. Therefore, these are very interesting and very complex situations. And one really wonders that which Indian, like if the whole thing is, how to define this Indian women? And how do you define the Indian feminism? So these are all complex questions. Often the feminists are blamed of aligning themselves with communities as caste lines and a communal agenda, as it is evident from Sati case in Rajasthan and Shahabanu case as argued by Arvinder Ansari and Rekha Pandey. How one identifies oneself and how the self-identity is constructed, differences between the society marks as an individual as belonging to it, forming of body and collective identity through public rituals of mourning and celebrations, how in case of marriage, widowed and sati individual's sense of belonging to a society, one preserves one individual's specificities, are all deep philosophical questions. The Constitution of India provides gender equality right from its independence from 1947. Still, gender justice remains a myth in India. Our legal system and policies also provide right to equality, bodily integrity, sexual autonomy, and freedom of speech, including sexual speech, safe mobility, etc. India is committed to United Nations Declaration for Equal Rights, but the incident of gender injustices are rampant and part of the day-to-day life. Women often do not consider them as problems or injustices. Sexism pervades at home, school, workplace, and public arena. Boys and girls grow with sexism. One hardly is aware of one's deep-rooted exclusionism. The existence of sexism is in daily life a part of lifestyle, basically due to the long history of males being in the charge and heads of the office and households. Women do not exercise the constitutional rights and power. Most of the Indian women do not take advantage of the opportunities and power, sometimes due to lack of awareness and sometimes due to the stigma and fear of being marked as bad women, going against the established norms of the society. The country is by and large still male dominated and unwelcoming to feminist movements that go against the sex gender tradition of India. Even if one is aware, it is taboo to raise a voice. Silence and tolerance are traditional virtue for women. Thus, most of injustices go unnoticed. But when some incident gets focused by media, sometimes unproportionately, we try to reform the laws. Gang rape, female infanticide, violence against women, sexual harassment at workplace, domestic violence, gender discrimination, dowry, deaths, suicide due to atrocities and gender discrimination, bride burning, honor killing, etc., are getting reported more and more. But most of them are lying in the courts. In spite of best efforts, not much has been achieved. Criminal law to prevent violence against women keeps telling that it will take time to achieve the end of justice. Although change is taking place and the status of women is much better than before, women are exercising their rights much more than before. But the recent incident of 23-year-old student Nirbhaya in Delhi in 2012 proves the failure of the whole law and order system and the social evil which is deep-rooted in Indian society. Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, equating justice with death penalty and imprisonment is not a solution. The deeper question is, how do we discipline the sexual behavior of individuals and monitor, conduct, and enforce laws in a democratic system like India? How to eradicate the sexism which is so deep-rooted in Indian society, which has a history of more than 2,000 years? The focus on deterrence, which has been the main focus of gender justice, does not eradicate sexism nor provide dignity and respect for women.
Sorry to disturb you, ma'am. Sorry, excuse me, ma'am. Sorry to disturb you, but you have to wind up in 5 minutes.
Just few.
Thank you.
2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah.
The
Thank you,
focus
ma'am.
on deterrence, which has been the main focus for gender justice, does not eradicate sexism, nor provide dignity and respect for women. It does not provide choices to individual Indian women that they want to do and to be, not even freedom to walk on the streets without fear of sexual violence and rape. The foreign women visitors also become victims of much sex. One can only hope that gradually things would improve and the feminist movements can play very important role. Now, let me conclude by saying India strives to remain a just society with a proud tradition of diversity, no doubt. There's a Western baggage in India's liberal democratic experiment rooted in assumptions about reason and progress, but clearly one can notice in recent times the tension and confusion within the liberal commitment to pluralism and diversity in India, giving rise to the question, what brand of liberalism in India needs for delivering justice? Can liberalism be both substantive as well negotiable due to diversity in India? Deciding on the question secular gender justice in accommodating diversity has been a big challenge for Indian democracy. The task of where to draw a line between competing constitutional claims in such a diverse democracy is not easy to solve. Often the democratic ideals and liberal demands of justice lead to tension between individual rights and groups' rights, posing dilemma for conflicting equalities for secular gender justice. In Indian context, it leads to more complexities due to India's vast mosaic of caste, creed, religion, political ideologies, just to name a few. How does a feminist scholar respond to this is the biggest challenge today. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for taking a little longer here.
No problem. No problem, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's such an enlightening and very informative lecture. And now the floor is open for discussion and questions. If somebody has a question, they can ask.
Ma'am,
would you like to ask? Okay, Karandeep, you have a question, please.
Ma'am, so you recently mentioned about the problem that comes from tradition and feminism movement. So whenever we see in the text of any Indian religion or of any Indian knowledge source, we see that women are often treated as a trophy material. Like women are so pure, we cannot look directly into their eyes. There are many instances where women are described as so. So do you think that softens the image of women in society, that eventually makes the society believe that women are weak? And second part, it's a bit more specific one. Do you think the recent ban on commercial surrogacy has something to do with a society trying to oppress women?
Okay. Thank you. Karan Singh, is it? Yeah, Karan Singh. Yeah. Thank you so much. While I was presenting, I did talk about this, the kind of textual depiction of women. And I did say that, not only only the textual depiction of women, but also from the tradition, the way the women have been depicted. And actually there is a sort of double edge kind of thing. On the one hand, they are Devi like Durga, Kali, Saraswati, Lakshmi, etc., all powerful. On the other hand, they are like Dasi, that they have to be ordered all the time and they have to follow what their husband says, their son says, or whosoever is the owner of the house says. So, we have this double standard. So on the one hand, and actually it plays a very important role in the Indian society. Not only in Indian society, I would say that in most of the tradition, this is the same. I mean, if you look at Islam, it's the same. If you look at Christianity, it's the same. So as I said, that women's body is actually considered as impure due to menstruation, etc. And because the women's body is considered as impure, therefore even the emancipation rights are not given to women. Forget about this thing. So even, I mean, in Indian tradition, for example, moksha is the highest goal of human beings. But then women cannot really meditate and sort of, go, because they do not have the absolute right to become, I mean, it's recently things are changing, but I mean, traditionally, if you look at it, even now you find very few real, I mean, like bhikkhunis, perhaps Buddhism and Jainism, they were the first religions who started to accepting this kind of thing. So anyway, I mean, this is actually the double-edged kind of picture which we find in every tradition. So on the one hand, they are considered as mother goddess, and on the other hand, they are like they have to play like a fiddle. The second is about ban on commercial surrogacy. I guess here also it's not a very simple issue. It's a very complex issue because women has the right to her body, no doubt, but at the same time, the right to sell her body, for example, it's like having a sex, becoming a sex worker. I mean, if one decides to sell the body and sort of make money, and perhaps if that is the only way to get her livelihood, then what do you do? I mean, because either the society has to provide a dignified job to the women, or if the society cannot provide a dignified job, then the only thing perhaps left to her is to sell her body. So, I mean, these are very complex questions. So, I mean, they're not very simple. And as a philosopher, I think we really have to look into this, that how much right one has. I mean, like, individual is not an individual, only individual. Individual is also, if it's a social construct, then society has the role to play. And if the society has the right to determine, then society also has an obligation to provide the alternatives. So I think this is how I would like to look at it. So if a woman is compelled to sell her body and also to become a surrogate mother, and perhaps if that's the only way for her livelihood, then society cannot stop it. But at the same time, if society can give alternative ways, and also only on some kind of restricted situations, one can allow to sort of to have this surrogate motherhood, then perhaps scientifically one can use these opportunities which some parents do not have. So yeah.
Okay, so
Does
hi
that
ma'am.
make sense? Yeah, sure.
So I had a very basic question. So this is basically pointing out that every philosophical subject or every philosophical point of view has to like bring about the practical side of the point, right? The practical side of the topic itself. So in any given circumstance, whatever happens, like any theory you take, let's suppose to take feminism for that matter. So people start building their own theories, right? And after a while later, they like I've seen this, like some part of this particular section, they feel entitled to a lot of things, right? So which is not exactly correct, since I myself advocate true gender equality. So that in that particular sense, how would one go about like evading question? Or see, there are two ways to go about this: either you evade the question or you like discuss it out with the other person, right? So let's suppose so this is one thing that happened to me. So I was traveling in a metro, okay, and I've been to many cities, and the same thing has happened over a, like I've traveled around 8 cities, and this has happened almost everywhere. So if I'm sitting on a like metro, if I'm sitting on a chair and that is not reserved for a lady, okay, and still they feel entitled, they are entitled to like ask a person, and the person is supposed to get up and let that person be seated or something like that. So given a situation where there is a necessity for them, that is all good and fine. But let's suppose when a person comes and they feel entitled, but which is entirely wrong from my perspective, how do you assess that practical situation?
Is this Ishan Saha?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, Ishan. Well, again, I would say it's a very complex question, because you're right that actually your question has two parts. One is where I could see that, philosophy and its practical aspect is always important, as you said. And you said you also agree with that. But I could see that there is some kind of sound which you're kind of signal you are giving, that anybody can build any theory and start implementing, and then one has to, like others have to accept it. Now, at least as far as feminist philosophy is concerned, this is not the case. All right. So I just want to make it clear that as far as, it's not like something like, that you simply, somebody threw new theory and then people have accepted it. It's not that simple.
Yeah, so
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So there is actually something like pseudo feminism, okay, and I've seen that actually happen. So that is why I'm asking you this question.
No, this is what I'm saying. So that's what exactly I'm saying. That look, there are some deep-rooted questions, and actually during my talk, very briefly, although I have packed a lot of things, I know, and I was perhaps hurriedly sort of trying to pack up a lot of things. So there are very, very serious issues which are actually going through. The whole world has had to accept. So it's not that easy that somebody threw the theory and somebody has accepted. It's not that. So actually, it is a very, very serious critique of the mainstream philosophy, and that's how feminist philosophy developed. Now, having said that, your concern that the pseudo-feminism, I can see that, you're using the word constantly. See, what happens is that, the women issues are, as I said, are very important issues, as I've said, but also in Indian context, the caste system. I just want you to compare it with the caste system, because we are talking about reservation for women. We are also talking about reservations or some kind of privileges for caste system. All right. For OBC, for all sorts of underprivileged classes we have been talking about. Also some kind of minority groups we are talking about. So all these kind of, and these are all interrelated issues. So try to understand in that sense. That look, see, whatever rule you make, there are always some ways some people who will misuse it, But the intention for the rule making is really good, in the sense that those who have been underprivileged till now, for them, for example, if a woman is really pregnant, or if women have this menstruation problem, so in the buses, for example, the reservation policy, some seats are reserved. They have small children to carry. So with this kind of caring and emotional and good intentions, that these seats are preserved. Now, once they are made, not every woman is actually sort of handicap or she has a problem, So this much is absolutely agreed. But at the same time, for example, in my life, I don't know, have you seen a number of places you have a separate line for women? Especially I've seen that if you go for tickets, railway tickets. Now, of course, you have all this internet, but until some 4 or 5 years back, people used to stay in the line, and the women line was almost short. So all men will start running and ask women to get a ticket. So, and I've done many times that, okay, fine, why not? If women can help the men, why not? So I would buy a ticket for 4, 5, 6 men who would really approach me. So, and sometimes I would not even stand in the women's line. Why? Because I have no problem, why I can stand in general line, So just as you have people who would like to take the advantage, there are also people who are there who would help you, So I guess these are part of the game, that some exceptions will always be there, and we have to, until and unless things are settled. If you go to US, you don't have this kind of reservations. Everybody stands in the same queue,
Yeah, actually,
But
regarding that,
that's after maybe 50 years, you will see that there will be no privileges for women.
Thank you so much, Ishan. And now Principal Sir has already joined us. I would like our Principal Sir, Dr. S.P. Agrawal, to say a few words regarding the conference and welcome our speakers of the day.
Thank you, Jarunisha. I'm really very sorry that I could not join at 2 o'clock because I was in the way, and coming from Faridabad, there were a lot of traffic, and you can understand that joining online is always a challenge.
Yes.
But anyway, it's really a pleasure for me. Rather, I welcome both Professor Asha Mukherjee, who has joined us from Santiniketan, West Bengal, a very religious educational place, which everybody, appreciates and likes. And I have personally gone and seen that place. Yeah, because right now, I think our Delhi University person is the Vice Chancellor of that university.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, the other day he joined in one of our programs. And I also welcome Dr. Sameena Zahra from University of Queensland, Australia. Welcome, ma'am, and it was nice that both of you joined and talked to our faculty and students, though I have not heard you much, but I can see that it's a lively discussion going on with our students. Well, I'm not an expert or I don't have any expertise in the field of philosophy, but it's a very interesting topic. Is feminist philosophy a misnomer? Well, I don't know whether it is a misnomer or not, but yes, there is a feminist philosophy, and I believe in that philosophy. There is nothing wrong in it, whether it is in India or Western countries, because I can relate an incident. I have lived in US for 5 years. And most of the time, when Indian women goes to US, what happens is that they follow very closely the Western counterpart. They are very, eager to adopt the dress of that country. Very, very eager. And they want to wear the shorts and the, small skirts or whatever. But another point is that, which I always feel they should follow that also, that they do not follow that they work with the, kassi in the garden. So that has also to be come with that, so there is nothing wrong in doing that. We have to adopt to the different cultures. There is nothing wrong in that. But another important thing is that wherever we go, like I belong to a very small place in Mewat area in Haryana. If I go in my village, I should adopt the conditions or the culture or the kind of dressing there. I must. And when I come to my place in Gurgaon, I have to do that way. When I'm at home, I'm different. When I'm at my workplace, I'm different. So that is always there. And similar situation is with the women. So I believe that there is nothing wrong in it, and they should have their viewpoint. And I know that today a lot of freedom and lot of acceptability is there, and we all now started respecting the women at our homes as well as at our workplace. And always we are very careful while dealing, because sometimes we might feel that this is the way we should, but if we analyze that in perspective, from women's perspective, then we understand that yes, their perspective is correct, and we should also be sensitive to their needs, and similarly the women. So with this, once again, welcome to our guest, and I'm sure the discussion going on should continue. And thank you very much for joining this afternoon, because we are always fortunate that good people from academia and other world join this institution and talk to our students. Thank you very much. Over to Jarunisha.
Thank you so much for. Thank you so much, sir, for your encouraging word and enlightening sentences. So let me introduce you to our second speaker of the day, Dr. Sameena Zahra. Dr. Zahra is a feminist scholar, writer, and philosopher. She is a scholar and fellow of Auckland and New Zealand University. She has also a winner of various national and international awards and fellowships and grants. She has written various articles related to philosophy and gender violence, subjectivity, ambiguity and various women issues in various national and international journals. She has presented her research papers in various institutions, and various institution and national international conferences in UK, US, and New Zealand. Today, Dr. Zahra is going to speak on Western philosophy imagery on this particular question, that is feminism is misnomer or not?
Thank you very much, Nissa, and thanks a lot to Principal Sir and Asha Ma'am and all the other faculty members, and above all the students who are here. I mean, I'm in Australia. It's really hot, so it's hard to say that on a cold winter afternoon for me. But from everyone's sweaters, I can't believe that it's really cold, and people want to get inside their blankets and enjoy their afternoons. But thank you very much for being here. I just want to get my slides going before I begin. So just give me a couple of minutes. Okay, just give me a minute. My laptop is also almost 10 years old, so it's going to give us some tough time. Okay, so as I'm speaking from Australia, so I will begin with an Australian tradition, which is acknowledgement of the country. And as many of you are aware that Australia has its colonial past, and this acknowledgement is not actually merely a way to just say a couple of good words and acknowledging that, you know, injustice has been done. But I think it's the first step towards justice. So in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from where I speak today, the Turrbal and Jagera people. I wish to pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within our community. So as Asha ma'am has built a very good, background and given a lot of information about the topic, and some of these points I will be repeating. So I'll try to skim through these ideas a little bit faster. So I don't want to build the whole idea again, but you know, since a lot of my talk is built on that, so some of the points will be repeated. So I just bear with me for that purpose. So I'm not going to ask the relevance of the question in the beginning. I'll come to that as I go through this lecture. So, but what I want to do today is to begin with an anecdotal reference. So, I mean, I have studied in India for my master's, bachelor's, master's, and my MPhil, and I did my PhD from UQ. So when I was first introduced to philosophy, I was an undergrad, a 17-year-old who opted for philosophy because I was hoping to get some ideas so that I can become a better literary person. So more towards the literature was my focus. But as you can see from me sitting here today, that I was immediately smitten by philosophy, and I dedicated my career to philosophy altogether. However, it wasn't until the 5th year of my studies of philosophy that I raised the question of feminism for the first time. And understand that in those 5 years, I was never introduced to a course on feminism, which I'm so glad to see is changing, seeing so many young students, you know, getting introduced to feminism at their undergrad studies, but I wasn't. And I was a big fan of Kantian philosophy. I used to read Kant, and it sounds cheesy, but I used to live according to the dictates of my reason. So I tried to practically, you know, live according to Kantian philosophy. And it was like a love at first sight. From very first days of doing Kantian ethics, I fell in love with it. However, when I was in my final year of MA, which is my 5th year of doing philosophy, I just asked this question whether Kant would consider me a philosopher or a rational being or not because I'm doing it good or not, but rather whether as a woman can I do philosophy or can I do rational thinking. And I asked some of my teachers and they had no answer. So I tried to dig deeper, read some books, did some research, and the answer I came to was that no, according to Kant, I do not have the rational capacity. And you can imagine it's not an earth-shattering moment, but I felt a lot of betrayal because I was like the brightest student in my class. I was respected by everyone. And I was in a class where 60 to 70% students were boys, but still I was the topper. So I didn't consider myself lacking in philosophical capacity, but my dear old Kant was not thinking me capable of doing philosophy. And I started questioning all the other philosophical systems. And the more I learned, the more devastated I was. And I just broke off with them for a long, long time. And recently I reconciled with those philosophers again. But you can, I mean, I'm not trying to tell you this story to just tell you my journey of self-discovery, but rather what I'm trying to show is that on the surface, philosophy appears so neutral, like it's available to everyone. It's just so warm and welcoming. It doesn't matter who you are, what sort of body you have, which religion you belong to, which class or caste or which race you belong to. Nothing matters. It's just pure reason, pure rationality, and you are welcome. But once you start digging deeper, you become aware that no, the subject that we are talking about, the subject of Western philosophical imaginary, and again, I'm making a very clear, statement here. I'm discussing just Western philosophy. I've studied Indian philosophy, but I don't want to do a reductive study where I bring both of them. As Asha ma'am was saying, that we need to treat each individual culture and tradition individually and not jam everything together. So I'm focusing purely on Western philosophy. So that's the biggest problem, that it appears so rash, so neutral, so accepting to every idea. However, once you start looking into it, it has its racial biases. So it's not like it appears that, the rational human being is not white or black or any other particular color. But when you start digging deeper, it's a white man, and not just any white man. It's a privileged, upper class, well-educated white man, not working class white man. So there is this bias that is hidden underneath this universality of philosophy that feminist philosophy questions. So that's where, we, just a second, my slides are giving me tough time. So yeah, so that's why we need to have this need to ask this question, because on the surface, philosophy appears neutral. And when I say feminism is one way of addressing this limitation of philosophy, because you need to address this question from the perspective of race. You need to address this question from the perspective of class. So all these questions intersect. They are not separate questions, but again, they have their own axis. So the axis of this question that we're working on is sex or gender of the subject. And sex, gender, as ma'am was trying to approach the subject, is a very complex issue, and I don't want to get into there. So we will use them here to some extent interchangeably, but there's a lot of debate around that. But just to keep matters simple, so that's where the question of feminist philosophy begins, that how to approach philosophy by raising the question of the sex of the subject. Who is this rational subject who is speaking and attempting to appear neutral, but is not? So, like, we try to approach this question from a feminist point of view when we raise this question in this way. So, but when we are raising this question, we also need to understand that the way we raise this question and on what levels we are going to dig will also determine what sort of solutions we are offering, because we are not just raising questions, we are also talking about what to do next. So that's the most important thing to remember. And again, I'm not going to talk about our social life, how to, change the situation of women in society, how to make our society more equal, as ma'am was addressing. And again, as she was trying to show that it's such a complex question, and when she was trying to answer the questions as well, that there's no one easy fix. I'm focusing purely on philosophical thought. I'm focusing purely on academic thought. But I also argue that this is not something that remains only in academia. It affects our lives. So it's extremely important to raise this question. But the point is that the way we raise this question will also determine the kind of solution we are offering. So, for example, if we are saying that, is philosophy misogynistic? Is philosophy not accepting to women? And by this we mean that there are very few women in academia, very few women doing philosophy, they are not accepted. Then it's a big problem, but it has an easy fix. Include more women. So, like, philosophy is fine. It's only the cultural reasons, it's the politics of institutions that is not allowing women to get in. Similarly, my own problem, the problem that I suffered with, was that I wasn't informed about the misogyny inherent in these philosophical systems. So if when I was being raised, I was given enough information. These philosophers were contextualized more. And I was told that, these philosophers have these misogynistic biases. And, when you are reading them, take them with a grain of salt. Then I might not have faced that kind of betrayal. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure all of you must have read about Rousseau's social contract theory when you were in high school, probably. And I was a big fan of social contract theory. I really enjoyed it. And I loved the idea of equality, fraternity, liberty. But I was shocked to learn that I do not enter the social contract. Before the social contract, I lived as an equal of man, but the moment the contract is created, I become his dependent. So that was something very confusing. And you just learn that everyone you trusted is betraying you. So it all but this problem is really the kind of, what I can say is, like, this limitation of our institutions, that they do not contextualize the philosophers, the thinkers that we are reading. So if we are given enough information, then we can engage with these philosophies with a much more understanding, with much more comprehensive way of dealing with it. So but I mean, then we can say that, we don't need to throw away the whole barrel of apples. It's just some rotten apples, but even not rotten apples, just carve the rotten part and you have this sweet, nice apple of philosophy, all well preserved. And some feminists would argue in that direction, and they would say that whatever rationality was conceded to men should be conceded to women. Women should be included into this definition of rationality. However, the philosophers I focus on, and I think most of the feminists of today, apart from some neoliberal or liberal feminists, would argue that philosophy itself has this misogynistic foundation, and it is not an easy fix. You cannot say just cut this part, cut that part, and it's all intact. You have to do a much more rigorous, a much more foundational critique of philosophy itself. And that is something which is hard to do, but which will provide better results, but which also shakes and unsettles the whole foundations of philosophy, which leaves us with the question what to do next. And that is something that I will come to in the next part of my presentation today. So, but first I want to focus on some of the great feminist philosophers who have tried to expose this misogyny of Western philosophy. And as I was saying, that ma'am has gone through a lot of those details, so I won't go a lot into that discussion, but I will try to bring some of these points forth. Okay, so one of my very favorite philosopher is Genevieve Lloyd. She's an Australian philosopher, and her book, The Man of Reason, came out in 1984. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it to everyone. I mean, her treatment of Beauvoir is not something that I would, agree with like 100%. I find her treatment of Beauvoir very critical, in a way of like harshly critical and not very positive, but the way she unravels and the way she opens up the discussion about this rationality of Western philosophy, which appears so neutral, so universal, but however it has this bias towards masculinity, which cannot be hidden. The ones who start digging it, you can see it. So it's not ever claimed that that this subject is man. It says, oh, this subject is universal. It doesn't have a sex. However, the moment you start looking at it, right, straightforward, women are excluded. So if women are excluded, then definitely the subject is man. male, and the problem is that how can they claim it to be neutral in that case? So she starts, exposing this scandal of philosophy in her work. And I'll just go through one of her paragraphs, which is very interesting. She writes, it's from the very early parts, I think it's from the introduction. The maleness of the man of reason, I'll try to show, is no superficial linguistic bias. So it's not like that we just write man for humanity. It is deep in our philosophical tradition. This is not to say that women have their own truth. Just a second. It is not to say that women have their own truths, or that there are distinctively female criteria for reasonable belief. It is, however, to make a claim which is no less a scandal to the pretensions of reason. Gender, after all, is one of the things from which truly rational thought is supposed to proceed. Reason is taken to express the real nature of the mind, in which, as Augustine puts it, there is no sex. The aspiration to reason, common to all, transcending the contingent historical circumstances which differentiates minds from one another, lies at the very heart of our philosophical heritage. So we don't only claim that reason is not limited to sex or class or race, but we also say it's not limited to time. So it's timeless. We have the same reason from eternity. The conviction that minds, insofar as they are rational, are fundamentally alike underlies many of our moral and political ideas, as aspiration has inspired to our ideals of objective knowledge. The claim repudiated by relativism that reason delivers to us a single objective truth has often been substantiated by appeal to reasons, supposed reasons, and that knows no sex. I will argue, just a second, supposed transcendence of all differentiating, that differentiates minds from one another. Our trust in a reason that knows no sex has, I will argue, been largely self-deceiving. So this is from her work, The Man of Reason, from a very introductory passage. And she goes on to expose the bias, the male bias of this Man of Reason. And she goes through like different stages of history. But what I've done here is because, as you can remember, Ian Whitehead has said that, all Western philosophies footnote on Plato's thought, which to some extent can be understood as, discussion of Greek ideas, going back to the Greeks, ancient Greeks and their philosophy. And it's so interesting to see that the table of opposites that the Greeks, and as ma'am was talking about the binaries, so this is the table of opposites that the Greeks have, and you can easily see that they are totally seen as one is excluding the other. And so you have certain things on the table on left side and the certain things on the table on the right side, and none of these two are, like there's no ambiguity in between those. And you can clearly see that man and maleness, so like male and masculinity are form, light, goodness, clear, determined. So everything that they find has like more value is on the left side with man, and on the other side, on the other side of the table, you have female, which is bad, which is femaleness, inferior, disorderly, confused. And I have just chosen one table, but you can find many tables, and there will be some consistencies within those tables, and you can see that these two do not converge. There is no middle point between these two. And so this is what I mean. You can see that this kind of distinction clearly shows that there is this bias, this inherent bias at the very basis of Western understanding of what is rationality, what is reason, and who can be a rational subject, who can practice reason. So at the very heart of such discussion, we have this difficult and hard to overlook kind of discrimination. So coming to modern times, and like there are multiple examples throughout medieval times, but I've just chosen one example from modernity. I think I've chosen two, but I'll not read both of those. I want to skip through it. Coming back to our dear old Rousseau, and he talks about the search for abstract and speculative truth, for principle and axioms in the sciences, for all that tends to wide generalization, is beyond the grasp of women. Their studies should be thoroughly practical. It is their business to apply the principles discovered by men. It is their place to make the observations which lead men to discover those principles. Men have a better philosophy of the human heart. but she reads more accurately the heart of men. Women should discover, so to speak, an experimental morality. Man should reduce it to a system. Woman has more wit, man more genius. Woman observes, man reasons. And this is from email. And as you can remember that if you like, I really liked Wordsworth's Lucy, and as I remember, it was based on email. So I had very high hopes for email. But email is just an ideal for a boy's education. The ideal for girls' education is Sophie, and it is such a terrible kind of a model where she's just turned into something who just pleases her husband. So that is the whole training of Lucy, that she's pleasant to her husband. That's, sorry, not Lucy, Sophie. So you can see that at the very heart of this philosophical idea about, so like when Rousseau is talking about all these ideas of philosophy of equality, he is very clearly thinking that women are not part of that idea. So similarly with Hegel, I'm not going through that, but you can, while I'm speaking, if you want, you can look at this slide. And Hegel's misogyny is very clear. You can easily find passages and passages where he refers to women's inferiority to men. So I won't go through that. So the next point I want to come to is that the problem here that we need to ask is, and that we need to work with is that when we look at these tables and when we look at these discussions, it's not merely that we see that, you know, these philosophers grew up in a culture where women were not considered intelligent or equal to men, so they just kind of showed the bias of their time. When you look at these passages and when you look at those tables that were created, you can easily see that they have built very clear separate categories of male and female, or masculine, and more than male and female, it's masculine and feminine. And when we talk about categories of masculine and feminine, we are not talking about real men and real women, but rather some kind of an imaginary, some kind of categories which are not considered actually instantiated fully, but somehow a kind of a liminal idea that kind of guides us. So, you know, so we talk about that this man is not masculine enough or this woman is not feminine enough. So we think that men and women partake in those ideas, but when we talk about masculinity and femininity, we somehow are looking at individual men and women, but somehow also going beyond that. So if you are interested, you can look into the idea of how masculinity and femininity are myths created by, you know, our imaginary, how they are limiting concepts, but how they are also the concepts that kind of, what you can say, like a very Butlerian term of that kind of dictates our life, you know. So you live by the dictate of masculinity. You need to reach to that ideal, and as a woman, you need to lead. So you never reach to that ideal, but that is something you actually aim at. So these are created in that ideal. And these philosophies, when they're talking about ideas of reason, goodness, they are looking at these distinctions of masculinity and femininity, and that is where their you know, starting point is. So the problem, once we understand that masculinity and femininity are at the heart of such discussions, although they don't appear so on the surface, but once you dig deeper, you see that they are foundational to these discriminations and distinctions. You realize that it's not so easy to purge philosophy of its misogyny. So I just want to bring Simone, although I'll come to Beauvoir later, but here I just want to bring this particular passage from The Second Sex, where she starts that the categories masculine and feminine appear as symmetrical in a formal way on town hall records or identification papers. But so she's saying that it appears that male and female or masculine and feminine are totally symmetrical terms. There is nothing hierarchical going on. There's no, it's just a kind of like a category we have created to, you know, organize our life. But she says that the relation of the two sexes is not that of two electrical poles. It's like they are not the opposite. The man represents both the positive and the neuter to such an extent that in French, hommes designate human beings, the particular meaning of the word being assimilated into the general meaning of the word homo. Woman is the negative to such a point that any indetermination is imputed to her as a limitation without reciprocity. So it's not like men and women are two poles balancing each other, but rather man has every positive as well as neutral. So he has everything that can be said good about humanity, and he can also represent humanity as a neutral being without being affected by his gender. And woman is to the extent the opposite of man. So like the way Irigaray puts it, it's like we don't have man and woman, we have man and not man. So we don't have woman. She says that we need to find woman, we need to build woman. There is no woman, we have just man and not man. So so this is the picture that we see. So we think masculine and feminine are like that, but that's not the case. Actually, what we have is we have a hierarchy. We have masculine on top and feminine on bottom. And that's where, the whole issue is like, you often see that male and female, man and woman written next to each other, which gives it a kind of a semblance of symmetry, but there is no symmetry in this situation. So what I want to go to next is, so again, coming back to this idea, I said, okay, no problem. Like so far, the man of reason, the rationality of Western thought has excluded women, but it doesn't mean that we need to live with that kind of exclusion. We can actually try to include women in our definition of rationality and somehow, build a much more inclusive rationality, because we can still salvage philosophy and say that everything that we have said about masculinity applies to humanity altogether, and this negative representation of women is totally misogynistic and we need to overcome it. And if we do that, philosophy can be saved. But there are multiple philosophers, multiple feminist philosophers who would read their works rationality. There's this distinction. It requires this kind of binary. It cannot work. And I don't want to go very much into that kind of details, but the way to understand it is that when we think of reason, we always pitch it as something opposed to emotions, as something opposed to nature, as something opposed to chaos. And the problem is that when you look at a human being is not that clearly rational. Human being is a mix of everything. So like when you do Descartes, it's like clearly mind and body. But as a person, I am an embodied subject. So my mind and body cannot be so clearly put into two clear boxes. And that's where this category of masculine and feminine is so useful for this idea of rationality. And so I'm borrowing a term from Sarah Heinemann, when she's analyzing Beauvoir's work, she uses this idea that what Beauvoir exposes about the Western tradition, and it's not just the philosophical work, Beauvoir is also talking about the Western culture, the myths that work at those culture, the literary works, and the philosophical ideas altogether. So she talks about the theory of projection. So what it does is that it isolates all positives and all good things that it wants to preserve into reason on one side, and all negatives, all the things that this Western imaginary considers that will soil reason. So, for example, emotions can cloud your clear rationality. So it puts all of them on the other side and projects everything that can soil reason onto femininity. And by saying that, these are the traits that women have. So on the surface, they don't claim it. They say that these are feminine traits, and they don't say that men don't have it. But somehow, it works. So like when a man is acting emotionally, they say that he's too feminine. So you can understand how these kind of poles work, these two distinctions work. So what they do is that in order to preserve this purity of reason, they project all the negativity on femininity and preserve this pure reason, which they don't say is masculine, but it's presumed it's masculine, but at the same time, it's somehow neutral. It's very confused logic. I totally get your confusion that if it's masculine, how can it be neutral? But somehow hormones do not affect men, man's body do not affect him. That is somehow tried to work out into a logic. And that's something that, so what I'm trying to bring out here is that if we try to get rid of these ideas of masculinity and femininity, then where would these negative aspects of, human, I mean, you can above all understand it in terms of human body. So saying that, during menstruation, during pregnancy, women's hormones play games with them, women's emotions are stronger than their reason. They say that all that is negative about humanity belongs to on that side, and that's why this particular sex cannot enter into the definition of rationality. If they try to get rid of this distinction, then the problem is that you cannot avoid looking that, yes, we never find this pure reason. There is this problem that we face. We are, the moment you start drinking, your clarity of reason is gone. If you're too, like, I remember the Snickers said, you're not yourself when you're hungry. So you're hungry, your reason, you're cranky, your reason is, affected by it. You're tired, your reason is not clear anymore. With old age, your reason doesn't work that clearly. So all these limitations affect the way your reasons works, and that's where, if we try to get rid of these categories of masculinity and femininity, then we'll end up with a reason which is not that pure. So that's why it's so central to maintain this distinction. So I've got this very interesting passage from Bonnie Mann. She writes that the historical identification of women with nature often in the same breath that the human is distinguished from nature. So we say that humanity is separate from nature. And the next sentence, women are close to nature. Women have much more closer affinity to nature. So she says that it's so neatly done that once you start digging it, you realize how scandalous it is. And an obsessive fascination with natural and sexual differences, which we inherit like a bad debt, are at the heart of specific cultural legacy that women carry in the tradition of Western philosophy. So very clearly, when we look at Western philosophical tradition, this kind of discrimination is at work. Just a second. So I've got another passage from Beauvoir that I'm not going to read, where she also talks about why man is projecting. And if you read Beauvoir, you can see all these ideas being worked out so well, because she's trying to point out why man projects everything negative, everything that he, and when I say man, again, it's not individual man, but rather masculinity of reason. It's not individual men she's talking about. In her work, she talks about, and as one of the question was asking, she says that men and women both suffer due to patriarchy. Very impractical ideals are imposed on both of them. So, that's where she's talking about that, it's this projection that creates this kind of binary and total exclusion in terms of, Western imaginary. So what I want to do next is, so what do we do in that case? Once we learn that this is the fundamental problem with philosophy, at its core, philosophy is, and again, Western philosophy is built on this. And when I talk about reason, we can't say that empiricist philosophy does not suffer from that. No, empiricist philosophy is also built on a particular idea of reason. And the distinction between empiricism and rationalism is overstressed. They share too many similar points. So it's not good to put them in two different categories. So something that is kind of quite at the heart of Western philosophy. So what do we do now? Throw away all philosophy? I think here Michelle Leduff, one of great feminist philosopher, is very useful here. And she says that, feminism and philosophy are not two separate and totally different things. A feminist is someone who refuses to let others do the thinking for her. So, and that's what exactly philosophy asks you to do. So philosophy asks you to raise these fundamental questions, and that's exactly what feminism is asking you to do at the same time. But she also goes on one step ahead, and she says that feminism only is the only mediation through which women can do philosophy. So as a woman, because if you want to enter into the domain of philosophy, how can you speak if philosophy is saying that you are not invited, you are not included? So feminism is the only way a woman can do philosophy, because she has to critique the Western tradition that is silencing her. So that is the necessity. So it's like for, as a woman, you cannot do philosophy in any other way. You have to be a feminist. But as a man, if you want to do philosophy in its pure critical spirit, you have to be a feminist at the same time, because you need to raise these questions in order to, so you need to do your thinking for yourself. Kant is not sufficient, Hegel is not sufficient, or whatever philosopher like is not sufficient. You need to do your thinking for yourself. And once you start doing that thinking, you realize this basic misogyny. Next, I want to point out certain points that my supervisor, Michelle Bullis-Walker, really elaborates in some of her lectures about how to do feminist philosophy. What are the projects that feminist philosophy should focus on? So she says that we need to question philosophy's claim to universal truth, objectivity, neutrality. So that's the first thing we need to do. We need to question the universal male subject and the disavowal of the body, passions, and emotions that this has traditionally entailed. We need to better understand the social production of philosophy and what this, and not just philosophy, all sorts of knowledge, and what this implies in terms of power and power relations. We need to question, challenge, and unsettle the oppositional logic that dominates much of the tradition of Western philosophy, the hierarchical opposition and dualism that prevails. We need to question the distinction between rationality and irrationality. So we have very clear idea, this is rational, this is irrational, but in actuality, that's not how it works. In order to expand our understanding of what constitutes rationality or truly rational thought and behavior, we need to question traditional philosophical methodologies, and that's very important, to devise new modes of writing and doing philosophy. So we need to question those methodologies that we have been borrowing, often quite uncritically. So, I'm sorry, I'm quoting a lot of passages, but I find that these amazing feminists have said so many good things that we all need to read and we all need to look at. So this is Elizabeth Gross. If you don't know her, please go and read her. She's an amazing philosopher. I'm so happy that she's also Australian. Now she lives in America, but she's an amazing, amazing philosopher. So she writes about what is feminist theory, and she says that feminist theory does not simply aim to reveal what is wrong with or false about patriarchal theories or philosophies, to replace one truth with another. It aims to render patriarchal systems, methods, and presumptions unable to function, unable to retain their dominance and power. It aims to make clear how such a domination has been possible and to make it no longer viable. So it aims to dismantle this whole system of misogyny, this whole system that is at work here. So how am I doing on time? Like, because now I want to discuss Beauvoir, but if I'm running out of time, I'm okay to cut that short.
Api, you have 10 minutes or 15 minutes to speak.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just, because I want to do a little bit of Beauvoir, but that's all okay. You have very good, able teachers. They can teach you about.
We are actually running a little bit late.
Yeah, I understand. So I'll just give a couple of things, and that's it.
Sure.
Just to ignite some interest, and that's it. So
sure.
Yeah. So I want to just elaborate a little bit about Simone de Beauvoir, and I'm not going to discuss who she was, what she did, and again, not overall her philosophical projects. I'll just leave it there. What I want to do is to show Beauvoir as a specimen of doing philosophy as a feminist within the Western philosophical tradition. And that's where the brilliance of Beauvoir lies. And that's where, when I raised this question, I said that how can we do philosophy as a feminist? Once I learned that philosophy has this misogynistic bias, what to do next? Do I discard it? Do I say I won't do it anymore? As I was like, I won't read Kant anymore for a couple of years. Or do I do something else with it? So as Gross said, that it's not enough just to say that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. What to do next? And Beauvoir showed with her work how it has to be done practically. And she did it on so many levels. And when we read Beauvoir today, we need to remember that she did it on such a broad, level. So I'm not going into like everything she did, but rather just pointing out one particular area where she worked and reworked these methodologies, discarded and questions and critiques them, and invents a new methodology of her own, which she isn't acknowledged that much. So she's often just kept into a section of like feminist philosophy or feminist gender studies, and nobody realizes how deep. Now, I'm not saying nobody, but generally she's not acknowledged as an original thinker of the stature that she is. So I'm just going to look at her reworking of phenomenology. And as I think that most of you have read some phenomenology, so I'm not going through these ideas. What I just put them here to just remind you that when we, and I'm like, again, like Beauvoir is working with Husserl in phenomenology, and she is very close in temporal sense to Husserl. I don't think she met him, but she's working with the idea of phenomenology very closely. And once you look at phenomenology, these ideas of epoche, bracketing, phenomenological reduction, transcendental phenomenology, all it brings to your mind is again back to that idea of neutrality. So I bracket everything that is, not added through scientific reasoning, added to scientific thinking, added to my prejudices. So I bracket everything like that. So like thinking of my sex or my gender has to be put into a bracket here, not to be rejected, but just suspended for the time being. And that poses a very big problem for feminist phenomenology, because if I am to bracket my gender or my sex in such discussion, how I'm going to pose this question as a feminist? Because that's the whole point when I start saying that I want to elaborate my first person experience as a woman. That's the whole thing that feminist phenomenology tries to do. But if traditional phenomenology asks me to bracket everything that scientific knowledge has given me, then this idea that I'm a woman is also given to me by society. I don't live myself, my body as a woman. I often forget I'm a woman. Others remind me I'm a woman. But that's something that Husserl is asking me to put into bracket, and that poses a really big problem for doing phenomenology as a feminist. But Beauvoir did it, and Beauvoir did it brilliantly and beautifully, which goes unacknowledged. And that's something that we need to come back to. So what Beauvoir does, and what she does so brilliantly in her work, is that she invents a new way of doing phenomenology. She never says that I'm critiquing Husserl, but the way she is working out the methodology of phenomenology, you can clearly see that she is reworking his methods, reworking his epoche, reworking his bracketing and reduction. So she makes woman the center point of her discussion. She brings, so she never brackets the femininity of the subject, the femaleness of the subject, because what she is trying to bring through her work and through all her writings is that you can never get rid of these prejudices, these pre-given ideas, because the kind of purity that Husserl is trying to reach is again another kind of an imaginary, another kind of reduction, abstraction, not a reduction, but like an abstraction. In actuality, you can never get rid of these biases, these prejudices. You know, you always use language, and language is never neutral. Language has its own value system. So what she tries to do in her work is to show that when you're trying to bracket these prejudices, you can never fully bracket them. What you try to do with your work is to expose those prejudices, but just exposing them, because in case of Husserl, if you remember, the moment I point out that I have this bias, I have this prejudice, I can easily put into bracket and move on. What Beauvoir shows is that these practices are not merely, these prejudices are not merely intellectual. They are not merely, rational. They are actually lived. We live these prejudices through our bodies. We live them with the look of the other, the way others look at me, the way I look at them, the way I feel afraid in a dark corner because I'm a woman. How can I put that prejudice in a bracket, No one is around me. I'm walking. I'm even in Australia, where I consider it to be safer than when I was in New Delhi. When I'm walking in a dark corner at night alone, I feel unsafe. How can I put that prejudice, and I feel unsafe because I'm a woman? How can I put that prejudice in a bracket? And that's where Beauvoir is saying that we can point out prejudices, and we need to work hard and really hard towards overcoming these biases, but it's not possible ever to overcome all these prejudices. So that's where she is reworking the phenomenological method. And again, I have this very interesting passage from Bonnie Mann, who is not just talking about Beauvoir, but the more recent phenomenologist, feminist. She says that feminists will be and have been extremely skeptical of claims to have set aside prejudices through an imaginative or meditative practice. Like you remember with Descartes, you sit in your dressing gown near your fire and thinking about, I'll just put every prejudice that I have in a box and start from fresh. And she says that in order to reach the essential structures of experience, given that these prejudices are not deeply entrenched, historically and culturally sedimented, and institutionalized, but are also tied to real material interest and entangled with profoundly personal process of identity formation. They are in fact part of what shapes our imaginative and meditative capacities in the first place. So the very process through which you're meditating is somehow built with the help of these prejudices. If one's very consciousness is formed in the rest of one's value-laden prejudices, one cannot, by an act of conscious determination, put them out of play. So that's what Beauvoir's work has taught us in one direction. I mean, and again, when we are doing Beauvoir, this is where what Beauvoir has taught us, and we have to engage with Beauvoir in that method as well. So when we read Beauvoir or these feminist philosophers, we need to critique them as well. So we need to question their prejudices, their practices, the influence of their time. So like Beauvoir has this, thought-provoking, this groundbreaking work, but her, treatment of race and culture is not very, accurate, I would say. And there are lots of problems that arise in her work. So we need to critique and work with her system as well from a feminist perspective. It's not just to these men philosophers, but also the feminist philosophers that we need to examine critically. So I think that's where I want to leave you to think about these ideas from that approach. And if you can take anything from today's discussion, is to become a feminist philosopher and try to, not a pseudo-feminist feminist as we had in our discussion, but rather a feminist philosopher in the true sense of the term, and try to question, the biases of philosophy, be it gender, race, caste, class, whatever there be, but also be aware that you can never reach that idea of neutrality. So you always be open to criticism. So stand your ground, argue, be clear about what you are doing, but be always open to criticism and accepting in that criticism. So I think I will stop here and I'll stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much, Sameena Zahra, for your such a wonderful lecture. I think it is really helpful for our student to understand what feminism is and why it is required for us to study. Not for just women student, but for men student also, boys also. It is very important to understand that. Thank you so much. And now floor is open for one question only. We can take up only one question. If somebody has a question, please ask. Yes, Karandeep, you have a question? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So,
yes, Karandeep. Go
thank
ahead.
you, Sameena ma'am, for your introduction. And according to what you said, what I was grasping is feminism philosophy, what a platform for the people who are not heard.
Karandeep, make it shorter. Make it shorter, okay? We are running late.
Can we describe feminist philosophy as the philosophy for the minority or the unheard? And because given that feminist philosophy is the generally the one who often brings forward the point of view of the minorities, the lower castes and everything. And since you live in Australia, do you think that kind of philosophy has given rise to the recently the Australia Day wala jo hua tha 20 February? Do you think that has something to do with that? They gave voice to it. That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Karandeep.
Yeah, so I'll be I really that's a good point to remember, that feminism is not just the voice of women, it's the voice of those who are silenced or who are not heard. No one is like by their choice silenced, and people silence them or they are not heard. So it gives them opportunity to speak, and often it's not directly the feminists who are doing it, but it's once you have unsettled this universality, this neutrality, this kind of idea of like this is something beyond doubt in one capacity, you also make room for other sorts of questioning. So definitely Australia Day has support of feminists in all capacity, but it also is very, very deeply rooted in the colonial past of Australia. And we shouldn't take away the role that Indigenous people are doing here to raise their voices. So these two work, hand in hand, but one cannot be reduced to the other, because colonial problem is another big issue and cannot be reduced to feminist issue. They often go together. So like if you read Spivak, you get to Spivak, you realize that, the idea of coloniality and the idea of oppressed women of India are often working together. So these ideas intersect. But they always often intersect, but we cannot reduce one question merely to the other.
Okay, okay. Asha ma'am, would you like to ask something or say something? Some suggestion you want to give? Ma'am, you are muted. Ma'am, you are muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I really don't have any question, but I just want to say thanks to Sameena. She really brought out a lot of issues, and especially sort of addressing these issues of rationality, and I think that was really good. And especially bringing the quotes from philosophers for the students, I think that's really good. Yeah. Great job.
Okay, thank you so much, Asha ma'am. Now I would like to invite Archana Jamatia to deliver a vote of thanks or express a vote of thanks to everyone. Archana, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
Archana,
I'm
Archana.
sorry for the background.
Not an issue,
She was
not
the
an issue.
baby.
Yes, I'm carrying a baby, but I was
She's
inspired
a
by
proud mother, actually.
lots of women out there who work with their babies. I was also thinking like that. If women can work in the farm or in like a paddy field with getting their baby, why not me? So I wanted to ask lots of
Baby is an
questions.
encouragement
I
and
wanted to ask
power
lots
strength.
of questions, and I was kind of wondering why our TIC didn't keep. Why did she give very short period for this topic? Okay, so
It was long, but there was some technical issue and there were some other problems. That is why it has happened. Well, next time I'll take care of it,
next time we will
Archana.
try to do for like 2 days. At least this is such an interesting topic.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it.
And kind of, I didn't get to ask any questions, so I was kind of feeling bad or unsatisfied. And
philosophers should be unsatisfied.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to thank our principal sir, who is always encouraging us to do something new, and our professors who came to deliver their knowledge to us, and also to the students who has organized this program. And last but not the least, our technicians, okay, who without their help we cannot organize this webinar. Nice to see you once again, Sameena, personally.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Nisha, you now.
Prakriti Sardana has a very, she has messaged me. She has a question. We can take up one question. Prakriti, you want to ask, you can ask. But
yeah, thank you.
Make it brief. Make it brief.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Zahra, for the great talk. Just a very out there question. I was wondering, how does such a binary foundation of philosophy treat a highly non-binary gender spectrum? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's another thing. It's like so clearly, demarcated that, if you have anything outside non-binary system, you are not part of it. So you are kind of a mistake of nature. So that's the whole idea. So if you do Aristotle, you see that there is this human being who is a perfect human being, and the closer you are to it, the more closer you are to what nature intended. And if you are like deviating from it in any way, there's something wrong with you. So there is no, so like it's like 100% heterosexual, 100% clear binaries of sexuality, of gender identities, and if there is anything in between, it has no room to express itself in there. So that's very clearly, in such system of rationality, these things cannot exist. So yeah, it's very clearly out there.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So thank you so much, everybody. I think students have enjoyed a lot, and it is such a Karandeep, now I can see their faces and they are so happy, First time I'm seeing them happy. Otherwise, they are always with sad face. I don't know why. But thank you so much, Asha ma'am. Thank you so much, Appi. It's a great day for everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, Asha ma'am, you want to say something?
Zairanisha, it's me. I'm saying from the background.
I wish we had more time for discussion.
Yeah, next time I'll definitely take care of it, ma'am. I'll definitely take it. It's a suggestion, and I'll definitely do it. It will be a long one, and then we'll try to arrange a conference.
Zairanisha, just one question. I am not expecting.
Yeah, Archana, make it brief because we are running short of time. Archana, you ask.
Just let me say something. Those who want to drop, they can easily go out, and so you can officially close the meeting and stop the recording. But if someone wants to stay and talk about something, we can stay, because like it's not a room, you can leave. So it's a virtual room.
It's a organizational means the ID is organization's ID, institutional ID. So it will be wind up after a half an hour. So Archana, if you want to ask, you can ask.
Just a
and make it
question,
short.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
this, please.
Usually, it's kind of, this question arises from a joke that enjoy the patriarchy. Okay.
Enjoy the patriarchy. Wow, this is very.
How? Let me know how.
No, it's just like my friend from JNU. They will just say it to me. Enjoy the patriarchy. Okay, but the question here is, how this patriarchy become a mass practice? I always wonder, how did this patriarchy
It's
become
very relevant. Actually, it's very deep and very relevant question. We all are enjoying patriarchy to some extent, I must say.
How did it become a practice? That's the only question I wanted to raise. I'm not expecting answers because it's difficult to answer.
I think it's when I do Beauvoir, I see in her, and again, Beauvoir's answer need not be acceptable to everyone, but I really like what she tries to do is that she says that, it has to be understood, first of all, in historical terms. You cannot just understand it in conceptual terms. What she tries to do here is that there were some historical reasons, you can say, that in early nomadic societies where men might have some kind of privilege over women because, they were strong, the life was difficult. So that was there in the past. However, that those certain privileges were used later on to impose through multiple institutions, through multiple practices, the idea of hierarchy, which cannot be sustained if you forget, for example, if man is physically stronger and woman is physically weaker, if we accept that idea, how does that affect you working in an office? You are working in front of a computer. What does your physical strength? So it's totally useless in that terms of that work. However, that because of those practices, we still live within these hierarchies, because the hierarchies imposed through so many minute and everyday practices, the look that you could receive from others, as ma'am was describing, the silencing of the girl child from early age, the dresses that we wear. So women's dresses are supposed to be totally impractical and just pretty.
That's true.
So this is imposed through so many means that that's why dismantling it is not like this, that do this and it's done, because it's so that's like the easy answer and the difficult answer as well.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I think we should stop here now, Neetu. Otherwise, people will put my head on the chopping board. So thank you so much.
Comment, comment on this last comment. In fact, Zahra has brought out this issue, and the historical issue, that historically there might be reasons, but the thing is that I suppose these are all stories, historically there was reasons, and these are also stories which are made up to please the women, that sometime we were together, we were equal, and then some reasons happened. So let's not go into all these stories.
I would like to add something here. So here, basically,
on a lighter note, enjoy the patriarchy. I suppose still, even today, women really enjoy the patriarchy, because it's easy way to patriarchy.
Asking the difficult question, not asking.
To even question one single thing. I mean, a woman, even before she's born, she's tempted with a lot of things, and she has to. I mean, just the birth itself is even before the birth, feticide, for example. I mean, all these things they're part of the whole system.
Yeah.
So questioning something, especially the patriarchy, is extremely difficult part. So if once it's full of kate.
Yeah, that is very true, ma'am. That is very true.
But if you choose to enjoy, the patriarchy, you have all the pleasures. For example, you will be treated like a queen by your husband. You'll be treated like a queen by your parents.
Goddess. You will be treated like a goddess of the society.
You fool yourself, become goddess, remain goddess, and enjoy the patriarchy. That's what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely, ma'am. Wonderful answer. So I think we should stop here and we will meet soon. I'll try to arrange some conference, a big conference in which we will have a lot of time to discuss on these issues. These are really very important issues, and I feel as a TIC that it needs to be explored. This area needs to be explored more, and our students are also, I can see they are very enthusiastic and they are very happy with it. So I'll think upon it. Thank you, Archana. Thank you, Asha ma'am. Thank you, Sameema Api. Love you a lot. And I think you all can leave the room of
Thank
this.
you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. We enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to all of you, and I wish I could talk.
Yeah. Same here, ma'am. Same here. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. How to leave? I don't know how to leave. You are muted, Karan. Just tell